Hey guys, Ted Bogert with the TED Show. We're back. I'm excited to have this young gentleman on the show today, Andrew Darling. Andrew is running for Orange County Sheriff. And so we're going to talk about equal justice, safer communities, and so much more today with Andrew. Welcome, my friend. How are you?
I'm good, Ted. I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. I love it when anybody wants to come on and talk about what their passion is, and you obviously have a passion. So, what I want to do, though, I think it's good for the audience to kind of get to know you. Give us a little bit of your origin story. You know, how you came to the place you're at as a candidate for sheriff.
Yeah, it's been an interesting story, and it's one of the things that I'm so incredibly grateful of. So, I mean, I was born out in Titusville, out in Brevard County. Lived in Minnesota for a couple years. My parents split when I was young. Mom and little brother and me came down to Orlando. Grew up here. Went to a few different elementary schools. Went to Walker Middle School. Went to Oak Ridge High School. Graduated from Oak Ridge High School. Joined the military in 2004. Spent a couple deployments in Iraq. I got out of the military, met my wife in the military. We
Wow.
got married in 2008.
Thank you for your service, by the way.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I thank my wife for her service every day because she's still active duty, which means I have all the benefits and I don't have to get up and go do PT. So we,
God bless her.
yes, I left out while I was a junior in high school. My daughter was born 2 months after I turned 17. And I've had sole custody of her. She's lived with my wife and I for the last more than 10 years. And next week, I will be taking her to college where she will be a volleyball player down at Kaiser University's flagship campus in West Palm Beach.
Fantastic. Congratulations. That's
It's exciting.
amazing.
Yeah, I got out of the military in 2011. My wife and I, our son was born in 2010. I ended up getting out in 2011. And I had an associate's degree, and I don't have a lot of patience. I went to a school in Columbia, South Carolina. It's called Strayer University. They have a bunch of campuses throughout the U.S. They even have a couple here in Central Florida, and they were like, it's going to take you 30 months to get your bachelor's degree, so 2.5 years. I was like, yeah, it's not. I finished my bachelor's degree in literally half the time. I did it in 15 months.
Wow.
And then I went right back and got a master's degree in human resources in another 15 months. I was working as a paralegal. Before working as a paralegal, I sold cars for a little while. I had my own business where I was selling mattresses, which made a lot of money. Didn't like selling mattresses.
Well,
So
that's an interesting sales position. That's got to go up there with one of the top 5 or 10
oh,
that I've
it's
had on the show. Mattresses.
if you ever wonder why when you drive somewhere you see a mattress store in like every strip mall, the margins on mattresses are incredible. Um, so I did that for a little bit. I got to a point where I really, really wanted to be able to do more, to have a bigger impact, not just on my family, but on society as a whole. And I wanted to come back home. And have an impact here in Orange County. This is why I am who I am. I've had so many incredible mentors throughout my time growing up here. And I went to law school. I did my first year at the Charlotte School of Law. I did really well. I was in the top 15% of my class. I transferred down to the University of Miami School of Law in 2016, did my 2 years there, graduated. My entire third year of law school, my wife was in Afghanistan. And
Wow.
we were actually living here in Winter Garden. And I was driving twice a week down to Miami to complete law school. And it was a challenge, but it's one of those things that, and I'm sure you've had those moments, Ted, where like you look back at something else you were doing, something you were doing previously in your life, and you're like, what in the heck was I thinking? But
24/7, Andrew.
yeah,
24/7.
but no, it's worked out really well. And then I continued my service to the Orange County Public Defender's Office when I first became an attorney. I worked there for about 7 months representing indigent clients and making sure that they had, adequate representation. And because I was running for sheriff, I had to leave the public defender's office. They didn't want just the appearance even of a
Sure.
conflict. So I started my own firm in December because I made the decision that it wasn't really fair for me to go to somebody else's firm and say, hey, hire me, but oh, I'm going to go win this election in 9 months and then I'm going to leave. So spend all your money on me, train me, get me proficient, but then I'm going to leave. So I started my own firm and it's been more successful than I even imagined. I am outperforming, the goals and the metrics that I put in place for myself. And it's been incredible, and it's allowed me to focus on this race. And I mean, Ted, we're 19 days away, man. I am excited.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the race because it's here, but I want to ask you a question. Why law? Why did you choose law to be the vehicle for you to make the change that you talked about for your family and for the community?
So everything that we do is interconnected with the law. So like if we go back to the civil rights movement, right? It wasn't just about trying to finally get to a place of equality. It was about fundamentally changing laws. It's the same thing with the LGBTQ movement. When we find everything led up to 2015 and Obergefell, like that, it was a long work to change the law. And if you don't have a good grasp, if you don't have a firm grasp on what the law is, the scope that you can help is oftentimes limited. And that's one of the things that I talk about a lot in my race is we talk a lot well, I'll say this, law enforcement talks a lot about the enforcement part. But oftentimes they overlook the law. And if law enforcement isn't following the law, who are we supposed to trust to do that?
It must have been it's very interesting time to run for any office, but I would imagine running for sheriff during such a tumultuous, what I feel like is a real groundbreaking time right now with everything going on. Must have added an interesting flair to figuring out, how to run a race, because everyone is sensitive right now and everyone's on high alert. And I feel like people are looking for answers and want real change and not rhetoric. Yeah. So what do you want to do? I know one of the topic of the show is equal justice and safer communities, so we can start there. Mm-hmm. Is that's part of your platform, what you want to change, what you want to do for the community? Can you elaborate for us a little bit?
Yeah, and just first to follow up on the point about everybody being sensitive right now, like with everything that's going on, good. It's about time.
I agree with you. Totally.
And I've been able to I get more credibility for my positions because I haven't been talking about them for 3 months, right? I've been talking about them for more than a year, and privately and publicly. Like, I mean, we could go search my Facebook page if we got really bored. But I mean, going back to 2012, I mean, I've been talking about the need for systemic reform in the criminal justice system. And so equal justice is it's not it's not aspirational, right? Like, this is something concrete. Like, the aspirational part of it is, oh, okay, maybe we can get to equal justice. And my part is, no, we need equal justice now. If we don't, if probable cause, for example, is different in Winter Park, in Lake Nona, in Winter Garden, than it is in Pine Hills, than it is in Richmond Heights, than it is in Washington Shores, that's a problem. Because you cannot use the law when it suits you and then abuse it when it imputes some sort of negative consequence to somebody else. So the way that we actually have equal justice is, one, by actually standardizing our policies and procedures, making sure that we lean towards non-arrest in every scenario that we can, because we know statistically the Black and brown community is going to be arrested for the same offense more often than white people. Like,
statistically, you can't argue with the numbers.
Yeah, the numbers are what they are. And when folks say, oh, well, that's because Black people commit more crimes. No, they don't. Black people, there is no scientific data that supports any assertion that Black people are more criminalized than any other group. There is nothing that supports that. It's crap. It is a result of our policing policies and this tough on crime rhetoric which one, doesn't stop crime, and two, if anything, it leads to future crime, because when you criminalize poverty, and in some cases when you criminalize homelessness, or when you criminalize common youthful behaviors, you are leading people to a life where they don't have a choice but to commit crime, because there's not a legal avenue for them to make money.
And this goes back to this systemic conversation. It is just an inherently bad environment, bad everything, and it is systemic. It goes back to the basics, which I want to ask you. You know, TJ is the one that said you need to meet Andrew Darling, and I said, all right. I love to hear new ideas, but here's the thing: we all have those big, bold ideas we want to do. Tell me how you think that we can make change, or how you plan to make change, because it's all good up here, and I don't believe you're a rhetoric guy. I believe you 100% want to make the change, but how are you going to do it, knowing that you're facing a systemic issue, and how are you going to make the impact?
The two ways that you do it are, one, with something that I call radical transparency. The other one is with actually building real meaningful relationships with the community, not barbecues twice a year where we show up in a neighborhood and we smile and we say, oh, we're here to help you. And the next day we're back on the street knocking heads, right? Like, that's not a relationship. That's abusive relationship, if anything. And the transparency part of it, I plan on publishing no less than quarterly. I want to do it monthly. I don't know how long it's going to take me to set up the infrastructure to do it, but I'm going to publish use of force instances that were determined to be, that's going to be 3 categories: justified, undetermined, and unjustified. So what does undetermined mean, right? Like, what is that? That sounds like a cop-out. Justified is a scenario where somebody followed whatever the use of force guidelines were. Looking back in hindsight, we can use that as a training mechanism to not escalate to that level again, right? So they may have followed the rules and done everything that we asked. And here's one of the things that the deputies have an issue with right now. They believe there's a different standard if whatever action they take goes viral or if it doesn't, right? Like, they believe there's a different standard there. I'm going to have clear and concise use of force policies. If my deputies follow the use of force policies, I'm going to support them. Because listen, if they follow the direction that I've given and it leads to a problem, that's a me problem, right? That's a leadership problem. That's not a deputy problem. So I will support them even if I don't agree with the outcome, because that's a leadership problem. And I will fix that. Building relationships with the community. I am going to have to work harder than anybody who has ever been sheriff before, because I am coming to this with a different perspective. I am coming to this knowing that a lot of our communities have been, my apologies, I didn't even know that phone was on right now.
I love it.
But,
that's good. That's good.
And there's not a way for me to reach it. So I apologize if I'm messing up the feed here.
We can barely hear it. You're good.
I am going to build relationships with these communities where I am going to be there physically. And I am going to make sure that my folks in my communities know that who their district commander is. I need them to know who is in charge of a particular part of our deputies in that area, right? Like, my community has to trust that I am there. And in the event they can't reach the person in charge of their area, I have to be accessible. And for me, it's not about building relationships just for the next 4 years or 8 years or however long I'm sheriff. These relationships are going to be essential to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement forever.
Right. I feel like that leads into safer communities. You can't really have safer communities if there's not an ongoing open dialogue between the sheriff's department and the officers and the community. So talk about what you plan to do. You've kind of given us a good outline. You want to be involved, you want to communicate. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, you also do want to make sure that they're safe from the way that we all think safe. No robbers, no bad stuff going on in our neighborhood. So talk about your plan on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want anybody to get confused. While I am by far the most progressive candidate in this race, I also understand the role of the sheriff. The primary role of the sheriff is there's two roles. It is peacekeeping in your county and to staff the courthouse. Those are like and serve subpoenas. So there's three roles, I guess. Those are what the general roles are, right? At the end of the day, the Orange County Sheriff's Office is going to transform from an organization that is just about protect and serve to a culture of service. Because protect and serve is redundant. Part of your service is the protection of your community. And we have one of the world famous customer experience organizations here in Disney. And to my knowledge, we've never reached out to Disney and said, hey, can you help our deputies when it comes to customer service, right? We can train our deputies all day to react to the worst of the worst situations, to the high stress, the shoot or don't shoot scenarios. We can train our deputies for that. But if we're not training our deputies how to interact with people for the 99.9% of times where it's not a life or death situation, we're failing our community. So I want to make sure that the policies that I implement, to include treating kids like kids, not arresting them for common youthful behavior, having a policy of non-arrest for misdemeanor offenses, except for domestic violence and DUI. There's not really a way around that. We got to make sure we're still protecting victims. And if we're going to really keep our community safe, we have to actively and aggressively put more manpower behind the sort of detective and investigative units, and not always just having people rolling around in the streets. Like rolling around in your police car throughout the streets, doing traffic stops and doing all this other stuff is not a good use of time and money when when a third of murders nationally don't get solved. And at least that many here locally don't get solved. So part of the bigger issue is, we've seen a rise in our murder rate here over the last couple of years. And the bigger issue with that is because we're not solving the first instance, whether it's gun violence that leads to retaliation, or whether it's a murder that leads to retaliation and in turn another murder, we're not solving the first crime. And because we don't solve the first crime, we're not in a position to react to the retribution or the follow-on retaliation from the retribution.
Right.
So, and that's because we don't have a relationship in the community. The community doesn't trust that if they share information with the law enforcement, particularly the sheriff's office, that the sheriff's office will keep them safe. I am going to bridge the gap, and I am going to keep our community safe, because that's the first objective as a law enforcement leader, particularly in Orange County, with the 9th largest law enforcement agency in the South.
The trust is everything, I think. I mean, I just feel like that's where the communities, where the relationship really builds and really becomes stronger. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, one of the things that's always on the table lately seems to be defund the police. And as sheriff, I'm sure that everybody, as you're running for sheriff, everybody who's in law enforcement is thinking, how is that going to impact me? What does that mean? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think the defund the police movement has been oddly successful, right? And you're like, wait, how? So it's been successful because for so long we've talked about generally reform, or like these tiny incremental shifts in a fundamentally flawed program, in a fundamentally flawed system. And what defund the police has done is it's brought this broader topic up of how do we actually spend our money? How much money do we actually send to law enforcement agencies? So I made a commitment a couple nights ago after thinking about this, long and hard for about a week. I made a commitment. I responded to Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith to one of his tweets. And I said, I am going to reject the $15 million addition to the sheriff's office budget when I'm elected. And the reason I'm going to reject it is because I believe that I can go top to bottom with the budget at the sheriff's office and make sure that I am maintaining my current strength levels. I can bring on at least 10. The first 10 hires that I make are going to be mental health professionals, social workers, and addiction specialists instead of 10 more deputies. I'm going to hire more deputies, but initially I want to bring in a staff big enough that when we get calls for service, we're able to respond with the correct professionals, with the correct first responders. Because if somebody's in mental health crisis, a deputy, whether that deputy has a master's degree or a high school diploma, is probably not the best person to respond to that individual first. Now, they need to be there to keep the peace, to make sure that folks are safe. Absolutely. But if we have somebody who is a trained professional in de-escalation and in recognizing the signs and symptoms of any sort of mental health issue, that's the person that I want responding to the call.
Right.
So it's, for me, it's rethinking how we do everything. I don't have, any sort of sacred program at the sheriff's office that I'm like, I'm not going to touch. The one that I've committed to so far to pretty much not eliminate or not drastically reduce is the aviation unit. So the aviation unit at the sheriff's office has 2 helicopters and an airplane. And what they do with some of the technology they do and how they are able to assist deputies on the ground, whether it's in a high chase situation or whether it's in when you have a fleeing suspect, the value that they have, like, you almost can't put a dollar on it. Like the value of having the oversight, having the superior position in any sort of conflict is so important. But other than that, I mean, listen, we're going line by line on that budget. I mean, we're talking before the 15 million, you're still at $267 million is the Orange County Sheriff's Office, 2,500 employees. We're going to go line by line. We're going to make sure that we are any place, if there's any lobbying that is coming out of taxpayer funded money to a sheriff's association, it's getting eliminated right away. Like, we will find a way to be successful, to keep our community safe, and to still implement the reforms that I want to reform.
I think it's so, I love that. I think it's so important that I think defund the police has that war cry has ignited a lot, but I think that sometimes people get on one side or the other because defund to them implies get rid of, and so I want people to understand that maybe that's not the best choice of words. Reorganize, redistribute, rethink how you spend your current budget. But I have to give kudos because it got people talking.
And so that is effective movements.
It was so effective.
Yes.
But I just feel bad for that. I feel like for our police force, who I know to be good human beings in general, the defund was just hit a nerve. And what I think most people just mean is have the checks and balances, reevaluate, redistribute, take the money and maybe spend it on things that are needed, and really evaluate, like you said, go line by line and go, okay, do I need this? Where can I redirect this money to make more of an impact on our community? And so defund, I think, gets a bad rap because of the name.
I was reading recently an article about a law enforcement agency in, I believe it was Illinois, that recently changed their vehicles to Tesla Model 3s. And the initial thought was, what in the world are you talking about? But then the chief of police went back and he started to talk about, when you talk about the cost of a vehicle, you talk about the cost of the vehicle over its life. And in law enforcement, you're driving, a lot of miles and for a lot of hours during a year. And there's maintenance, there's oil changes, there's, stuff that's going to go wrong. And the chief of police was talking about, listen, yes, the Model 3s cost more upfront, but you're eliminating the cost of fuel. You're eliminating the cost of maintenance. I mean, I think you only have to rotate your tires on a Tesla like every 20,000 miles. Like, it's something crazy, right? It's barely any maintenance. And it's one of those things that it's outside of the box thinking. Outside of the box thinking. So I'm not committing to buying Teslas, right? I'm saying there's a a way for somebody outside of the traditional law enforcement community to come in and think about problems in a different way. And when we solve those problems, we're going to make it safer for deputies, because at the end of the day, they just want to go home at night, right? You've heard law enforcement officers say that before. I just want to go home to my family. Well, yes, you do. And I want you to. And so do the members of our community. They just want to go home to their families. So I'm going to make sure that as I build this trust and as I build these relationships, like I've said earlier, Ted, it's going to make it safer for both the community and for law enforcement when everybody has a little bit at stake. And it's not just the community taking the brunt of it and law enforcement walking away scot-free every time.
Right. All right. Well, Andrew Darling, that was awesome. Thank you for sharing your passion and your insights. A really great conversation. What's the best way for them to reach you if they want to get involved, want to learn more about you and your campaign?
Yes. So my website is just andrewdarling.com. It's incredibly simple. All of my social media is at Reform Sheriff. I wanted to just say briefly, I've had some support of amazing organizations. The Democratic Haitian American Caucus of Florida is supporting me. The local Rainbow Democrats are supporting me, as well as the Florida LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus. I've had the support of attorneys Natalie Jackson and attorney Ben Crump, who were attorneys for the Trayvon Martin family. Mr. Crump is also the attorneys currently for Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd's family. He is the pinnacle right now of this civil rights and Black Lives Matter movement. I'm incredibly proud to have so many of the Working Families parties endorse me as well. A bunch of progressive organizations have endorsed me. TJ actually last night and the Soapbox podcast formally endorsed me yesterday.
I love it.
It's incredibly important, Ted. Thank you so much for this platform. Thank you for the ability to come and speak to you and to your viewers. And listen, I'm excited, man. We're 19 days away, and I'm looking forward to being Orange County's next sheriff.
19 days away. 19 days away, guys. You have to get out and vote. Go out and vote. Get educated. I have Andrew's website scrolling across the bottom, but we've tagged him. Reach out to him. He's incredibly accessible. You want to know who you're voting for, and this is a great way for you to do it, and he's open. So thank you so much for being on the show, Andrew. You guys take care. We'll be back soon. Get out and vote.